the sap house was built, I started putting this together in 1996. And it's still not done, so it's 2015. So the big joke was if I live long enough, everything will be done up here, and I'm getting concerned that I probably won't finish everything. But I like to make things that are, time tested and colonial in feel, and hopefully have somebody come in here and say, this is either an old building that's been well kept, or it's an old building that was put together again, or what have you. But that's the beauty of being able to use reclaimed material, and because all these brick came from different projects that I took down from chimneys and walls and such, and a couple of these pieces of stone, like this piece and these pieces, were reclaimed from another. They were curving pieces, and so it's wonderful because you can replace and recycle, all the material. Actually, the flooring in here came from another project that had been discontinued, so I was able to take that and do that. So, and like I said, this timber came from an old barn up by the reservoir. Well, as the rest of these timbers were all hand hewn out of stuff off my folks' property.
Yeah.
And these were old. A friend of mine runs a salvage business, and we take old structures down. And these were old gutter hangers from an old house up in New York State. So, everything can be repurposed and reused. Let's see if I can put a couple little pieces in here to get it going a little. Get a little smoky. The idea is if you can get the wood on the smaller side, it burns faster. And this is the warming pan for the sap. So this is where it all starts. Where it all starts is you have your firebox, which is called the arch. And the lid, the top of the arch, the top of the stove is the bottom of your boiling pan. And the only thing that keeps that pan from warping, twisting, or scalding is the little bit of fluid that's inside there. And so this pan is a warming pan, and it's a feeder pan. So you put your raw sap in from outside, put it in. It steams underneath here, so it gets somewhat warm. And then you have a trickle feed. You want to try to keep a trickle feed we can increase it, but at this point we want to keep it as light as possible so that we're not putting too much fluid in there and then taking away our boil. But we want to maintain enough fluid going in so that we're not evaporating more than we're putting back in, and then run the risk of burning the pans. And so it goes into this channel, this raw sap, and heats up. And actually, we may have to close the door because you can see the boils going down.
Okay.
But the raw sap starts to get colorized here as it heats up. The sugars caramelize. And then there's a little channel in here that it migrates into this canal, runs down this chamber, migrates into this one, and then this is where we draw off on this location. And so theoretically, this is where we're going to test to see if we have syrup. And the hygrometer will tell us when it starts to float up and down, and then that's when the fun begins. We start drawing it off, and we put it in the filter press, and let that run through the filter, and then we'll put it in the bottles, and then we're all good to go.
Good.
And that's not a lot to it. Just a lot of time involved.
Yeah.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring some sap in, and I'll pour it in here. What I have left, and we'll keep the rest in here. This is the last of the sap that I could extract from the containers out there because it's frozen solid. So we will put this in here. So this is raw sap right from the trees. It was collected maybe a couple days ago. And the idea is that what we draw off as syrup, we need to replace as quickly as possible into the pan. And if you look over here, Eric, the bubbles, I don't know if you can get it, but the bubbles are starting to change in here. And they're going to get really weird very shortly. Almost gets like snakeskin. They start growing in on themselves. And so a lot of the old timers, you know, they didn't have the high-tech hydrometer, and they would go by what they called sheeting. Is that they would take a scoop or so, stick it through, lift it up, and if it sheeted as opposed to drip, if it all went down kind of in an even plane, they would say that's syrup. And a lot of times they were pretty close. You know, they might have been off by a little bit, but nowadays if you get a hydrometer, there's no guessing. This is a hydrometer which measures the density of fluids, and this one's made for syrup. And what we're looking for is when it floats up is that you want it to be at a hot test where it's at 212 degrees, you want it at like 58, 59 Brix, and that'll float. And this is a cup that'll float in the syrup like that, and then you know that it's syrup, and that's the time to draw it off. So we will try it on here, and I don't even think it's going to register at all. So you put your cup in, scoop it up, and set it right there so that way it stays warm. And we'll lightly set this in, and that should float if it's anywhere near syrup, but it doesn't. You can hear it go. But if it were near syrup, it would start doing something like this and bouncing up, and then you'd want it right at that red line. That's when you know it's time to draw off. It would sit there like that. But right now, the density is far too light. But it may look, you know, it's starting to get a color in it, but it's got to come off in a sheet. So. There's not a lot to it. I mean, you could drive yourself crazy by reading all the technical manuals and stuff. You know, and a lot of people have no idea how this comes about. It's actually, I work over at Infinity Hall in Norfolk a few times a month, and the last night I worked over there, I brought some sap over. I brought a mason jar of sap, and it was very sweet, and I gave it to a couple people, and they were tasting it. And one of the fellows at the box office, Bruce, who's a sweet guy, he's from Southern California, he was like, well, what is this, moonshine? He's like, no, it's sap from the tree. And he goes, well, what's that mean? I said, it goes into maple syrup. And he thought you just tapped the maple trees and got syrup out as a final product. And it wasn't a joke. It was just that never dawned on him that there was more work to do to it. So I told him I'll bring him some syrup over, but he enjoyed the sap. So the native Indians are the ones that turned the colonials, showed the colonials how to make maple syrup. And whether or not it was a maple syrup or not, it's hard to say. But if you think about the Indians at that time period, they had been making it for God knows how, you know, hundreds of years. They didn't have steel, iron, or any other metal type, copper or anything that they could boil it in. So they would make birch bark or wooden bark vats, and they would heat stones up and drop the stones or place the stones into the sap, and the stones would heat the sap eventually and turn it in. So I've never seen this process done, but I guess they do it at the Institute of Indian Studies down in Washington, Connecticut. I would love sometime to see it. I guess I could Google it and see if it comes up on if there's a video or not. But how much time we have to put in to do this over an open flame? How much time did they have? And then how did they fish the stones out? You know,
Yeah.
and it must have been you know, an unruly process at best, but they did end up making some kind of a sugar that was a block, and supposedly the Indians, you know, certain times of the year, that's what they would live on, because the hunting, you know, their hunting season, you know, the game was all disposed of, and there were no vegetables, no fruits, no wild picking, so they would just have these blocks of sugar that they would just gnaw on, that they produce. So yeah, they're the culprits that made us get into this thing. It's probably a mixed blessing. It might be their revenge on us. But so yeah. And now, do you remember Mabel Holloway?
Oh, that was one of Albert and Dot's best friends.
Mabel was amazing.
Yeah.
I loved Mabel. She was a delight. The last time I talked to her, it was before she got ill towards the end. But I was driving by and I saw her outside, tooted to her, and she waved. And I got a little further down the road, and I said, you know what? I should stop and just talk to her, just to say hi. And we went and talked, and I'm glad I did, because that was the last time I saw her. But she was sitting well, she was sitting on her stoop and the front door open, barefoot, and she was cracking black walnuts with a carpenter's hammer. And it was, to this day, it's there in my mind. And yeah, she was amazing. She was a great lady, and she talked all those sugar maples on the road, and that stretch on the Round Road, which is delightful. That there's a lane, you're driving.
Cathedral. I think of that as a cathedral.
Her father planted those, and it was after the Civil War, so it would have been, it was 1870s, 1880s, and he planted all those along the road there. So they're all, what now, maybe 130, 140 years old, somewhere in that range, which is pretty neat. There you go. So you've got syrup right there. So see how much higher that's standing up than what it was before.
Yeah.
So we're right where we need to be. So that's the sap coming in. Now we're going to draw off. I don't know if you can get a good.
Yeah, fine.
That's what that looks like in the pan. And now we're going to go through the filter with it.
Okay.
We'll go up, put it into our filter right up here. Multiple plated paper filters. And we pour that through. Filtering is the most important part, because you want a nice, you don't want cloudy and items floating around in your syrup.
What are some of the impurities that are in the maple syrup at this point that you're filtering out?
Oh, they'll call that sugar sand, niter, and it's debris that's gotten in the sap from various ways. And the other thing is that the sap is mostly water, and so the tree pulls the water from the groundwater, and so any minerals that are in the ground actually go through the tree at certain levels. And so as we draw it off and heat it up, those are released into the syrup. So it's not going to hurt you if it's in the syrup, but it's nice to filter that out, because I'll show you, we'll pull a filter paper out after this one, and you'll see what we filter out. Make sure I get the right one. I don't know what I have in here, maybe 4 paper filters and then a wool filter. And the paper filters are the first line of defense to catch the impurities. So see, you can see there's a little bit. There's actually not as much as you would have thought. How's that look? And the key is not to pinch your fingers. I did, we had all the stone, Dusty Blast dug all this out. And we put all the stone up where you're standing. I just tossed it all down here so I can work with it. So it's a little unorganized, but it works. The object is not to lift the bare minimum of stone if you have to. Use its leverage to work itself. I don't know, did I send you a photo of the chimney I did over in Salisbury?
No.
I didn't send you one of, it was a firebox before and after photos? Oh, I should.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, it was fun. I was able to use, they were remodeling a house and they had a existing brick fireplace with simple marble surround around it. And it was, you know, it worked well. But they wanted to countrify the home a little bit, make it look rustic, so they brought some beams in and they were going to make the room look more like a tavern than a contemporary living room. And so I thought about it and they said, you know, we want something that just fits and is unique and is artful and is something that would focus your attention and bring you into the room as well as being functional. So I drew up a couple different sketches and got a feel for it. And figured, why don't I use reclaimed stone, meaning stone that was from other projects and had other uses, and perhaps we could use a minimum amount of stone so you don't have a lot of stone filling it in. So to cover a space in a wall that was maybe 6 feet by 9 feet in height, I used 7 stones. And I cut them all up in the garage, worked them all up, and then did an infill pattern, and it came out stunning.
Yeah.
And very simple, easy to install, great piece of artwork and functional, and just something that's like not what you'd normally see.
Yeah.
And you're using reclaimed material, you know, material that had another repurposed maybe, something like that, and it was quite enjoyable. I can move it. We'll get it. be the top, that'll be the face, that'll be the bottom. And then we'll just kind of persuade her to go down the ramp. Every stone is laid with its long way back. If you look at all this, you have the face, the longest part of the stone in, face, longest part of the stone in, face, longest part, face, face, everything back in. That way if there's ever any movement, it's going to all be integral and locked together. The wall has a slight batter backwards, back into the bank, so that way if there is any movement, it's going to want to implode as opposed to explode. Far better way to build. Getting at that last half inch. Have you gotten an image of the front of it?
Yeah. Yeah. Right now I'm just grabbing an image of you.
Yeah, that'll break your camera.
No.
All right, so this is one that we're going to fix. This one's from 1810. So the shoulder and the head broke off, but fortunately it's one piece, so we'll clean all this off. Somebody had fixed this once before with some type of like a plaster repair. And the idea about repairs, and this actually shows that it held true, is that what your repair is, you don't want to make it stronger than the stone. You want, if something's going to happen to the stone again, i.e. vandalism or tree damage or lawnmower damage, you want the repair to break in the same spot that it broke originally, so that you're not doing more damage to the stone. So your repair should be kind of the sacrificial element again. So what we put on is an epoxy, and then tomorrow we'll come back and crack fill it. And somebody did patch this to hide the epoxy. And the epoxy is strong, but it has less flexural strength than the stone does. So that'll give before the stone does, unless somebody really jams it in here and then they shatter it, but that shouldn't happen. So I'll get set up, I'll get some tools, we'll clean this off, clean that off, and on a day like today, the epoxy is perfect for doing epoxy. It's not so good for doing mortar work because it's so hot and dry. But the epoxy will set up really nicely. The chemical reaction will go because we're in the 90s. So should be a good set. So if I can mix all the epoxy at once, we can quick set this one and scoot over there and set that one, and then we'll be all good to go. So we'll do some preliminary stuff. And this chisel I'm using is a 19th century carving chisel. I was fortunate to get a whole 5-gallon bucket of them years and years ago. You can still get modern ones, but these are all handmade. They're really nice. They have a nice head to it, and they hold the sharpness rather nicely. That's a start on that one. Let's see what we have up here. And always, when you're working on these stones, always work in, never work out to the corner. And that's all some kind of a cement material that I'm removing there. It's not stone. Some people will take grinders out and they'll resurface everything, and it's not such a good idea.
Neil and Eric, Eric Neil.
Hi. Dad, can I try it on the back?
I got it for this one. All right. Don't scratch the stone, they're very light.
What side do you do it?
On the edge. You don't dig, just make it flush. What's that?
I forgot the drawing to make it
Oh, that's it.
off.
See those where they split the stone from the ledge? Those are drill marks. And they popped it apart, and then this whole dimpling was done by hand tools just to get it down to a level surface. And then this you can see where they use tools and they brought it a little more formal, and then they bring to the front, which was the presentation side.
1808.
When they originally carved these, they carved them on a flat surface on a table about waist height. And you want to use a light brush, because you don't want to damage the stone. And it'll make a big difference now, but it'll make a much larger difference in give it about a week or two.
Oh, yeah.
Really light now.